everybody, and welcome back to the Shell Live podcast here on the floor of WeBank National Conference in Austin, Texas. And I have with me a couple of our key Shell focal points in supplier diversity. With us are Cindy Bishop, who is the General Manager for our Contracting Procurement in Supply and Distribution, and Suzanne Williams, who is our lead supplier diversity advocate working in CP across both the upstream and the downstream businesses in helping to coordinate with contracting and procurement professionals across those businesses and find and connect suppliers with opportunities in those spaces. So we wanted to make sure that as we have all these other people that we are introducing to our podcast audience, to have some of our key Shell focal points as well, and to talk about some of the things that it takes to successfully connect with and be successful in operating in the Shell supply chain. So I thought I would ask maybe for a very brief introduction, Cindy, to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role, and then Suzanne in the same, and then I have a few questions for you.
Okay. So I'm Cindy Bishop, and I've been with Shell for about 26 years. I manage our procurement organization for our trading and supply organization. It's a global job. It's some of the things that I'm responsible for is I'm responsible for all of the bulk logistics, land logistics across the downstream businesses on a global basis. So that's everything having to do with road transport, rail cars, third-party storage. I'm also responsible for supporting our terminal and distribution organization. So it's our pipelines, it's the third-party storage, it's terminals, it's CapEx, construction, you name it, as well as our shipping and maritime, and I support a fleet of, the procurement for a fleet of vessels. So it's quite diverse, it's quite global, but it's also a lot of fun. Right?
And Suzanne?
Okay, I'm the procurement manager for supplier diversity across upstream and downstream, and that constitutes our trading and supply. I support Cindy's organization, all the people that work for Cindy that do things that impact us here in the U.S. I support retail, I support manufacturing, which consists of our refining and chemical plants, and I support our lubricants division as well. And then I also support our upstream division of Shell, which is totally different than downstream. That's been a nice learning experience for me over the last year. And I'm actually responsible for the execution of the program that Deborah's team sets the tone and the goals and things, so I actually have to execute that strategy. And I've been doing this for 6 years. I've been at Shell for 13 years, and I've been in this role for 6 years. It's quite unique. None of our competitors have my role within their organization. Shell's the only company that dedicates a procurement manager 100% of the time for our supplier diversity program.
Well, welcome. Thank you both for joining us. So let me start with a question for you, Cindy. As you think about WBE's approaching Shell for opportunities, what are some of the things that they need to be thinking about, things they need to know, and things they need to do to be best prepared to approach Shell for opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a really good question, and I'm gonna reflect on some conversations I've had today as well, because I think it's really impactful. I think a WBE having a very crisp and clear vision of precisely what their business is and what value they can bring to Shell, where they want to work, what they want to focus on, but equally important, where they don't want to focus on. Where, it's important to be able for them to be able to pinpoint, these are my strengths, and this is what I want to play to, and this is the area that I don't want to play to. I think both of those are equally important. A lot of times what I see is, in the zeal to get new business, we want to be all things to everybody, and we actually bite off a little bit more than we can chew, and that can be more detrimental than beneficial. The other thing I would say, and then this is something I tell my own staff, right, at my own procurement organization, it's about knowing the business, listening to the business, and if you can come in and help the business solve their problems, understand what their goals are, be a part of that solution to those goals, that's what's going to make the biggest difference, right? It's being able to speak that language of the business and being able to convey, I'm part of your business. I want to help you solve that problem, and I can help you solve that problem, and this is how I'm going to help you solve that problem. Most people will invite people into that type of an environment if you've got a compelling argument of how you're going to help them get to their goals or solve that problem. And I tell that to my own staff. And that's what I would expect from our suppliers, whether they're women-owned business, minority-owned businesses, or suppliers in general. That's the way you make progress.
I think one of the things that we are looking to help WBEs and MBEs do is to learn how to learn about our industry. So if you're a company that is already sort of either in our Shell supply chain or working in our industry, then you have access to really do some of that learning. For companies that may not be in the Shell supply chain or may not yet be in our industry but might have some transferable skills and capabilities, what kinds of things do you think they can do to get really in-depth knowledge that will help them to identify, again, where they might find their fit and where their offering might be a value add that they could offer to the industry that would add value for the businesses?
I think that's a really good question. So I'll start it, and then Suzanne, you might have ideas on this as well. So I again, at first it goes back to being very crisp, right? As a supplier, where the sweet spot is, where your own individual sweet spot is, and what value that you're going to bring to a company, what service or equipment proposition that you can bring to a company. And then it really is about networking. It's about finding out who else has done this, coming to events like this and really understanding who has broken into a company like Shell or like a big oil and gas company. It doesn't have to be Shell, it could be one of the other majors. How did they do it? How did they build their credibility? Speak to me about the challenges that the oil and gas industry is having. Research those challenges that the oil and gas industry is having. Because if you can speak that language, the language of the oil and gas industry is going to be different than the language of the pharmaceutical industry. There's going to be some commonality when we talk about supply chain, but there's going to be different pressures, different industry pressures that are going to be. And if you can speak that language and understand that, that's going to help you kind of get further down the path. Do you have other suggestions?
Yeah, and so, one of my favorite things to tell suppliers that when it's obvious they're struggling with how to speak to folks in the oil and gas industry, I listen and I try to be sympathetic, but the thing they have to ultimately understand is you, as a potential supplier to a company like Shell, you have to know your market that you're trying to penetrate, and you have to understand your competition.
That's true, yeah.
It's very, very valuable when you understand who you're competing against, because if it's a big company that you're aspiring to grow to that size, you need to follow their trends and understand what they're doing as well.
Right.
There again, know your market, know your competition. And I would encourage companies, if you're small and you're trying to infiltrate a company like Shell or Exxon or whomever, focus on one thing that you do really well. And you're probably not going to have an opportunity to come into our business on a first-tier level, but perhaps at a second-tier level. And when you have some experience under your belt, and when you're to the point where you're ready to be a first-tier provider to a company like Shell, focus on what you do really well. And when you're really good at that, then take it to the next stage and try to develop your capabilities in another area. Don't come in trying to make everybody happy. You can't make everybody happy. You'll fail that way. Focus on what you do well and grow from there.
I think there are so many ways today that you can find information and do research on the energy business, on any business, on any industry. I mean, obviously we have a website that has so much information on it that I couldn't tell you where everything is. And but you can really research companies like Shell in the web. You can connect with other industry forums. So, for example, the Offshore Technology Conference was here back in May. An incredible number of companies, and again, it can be bewildering to make your way through all of that, but the networking opportunities were immense for companies that were interested in, either already in or interested in getting in to that piece of the business. So offshore technology, which connects with our upstream business.
Right.
There's the National Petroleum Refiners Association, NPRA, that connects with, is an industry association for the downstream part of the business. There are other smaller organizations. There's the American Petroleum Institute, which is a major nonprofit body that supports the whole industry from the beginning to the end, and offers all kinds of opportunities in terms of knowledge and training and other resources, and also has very strong connections with all of our companies. So there are lots of ways to connect with our industry, and we really would encourage suppliers not just to rely on supplier diversity, because there's more than one way to skin a cat in terms of building your network of connections in the industry so you can get that knowledge.
And I think one thing that's very helpful for potential suppliers to understand, and I see this a lot at all these trade shows I come to, you'll mention upstream or downstream or midstream, and the companies don't really understand what we're talking about. So it's easy to do web research on the upstream oil and gas industry, the downstream oil and gas industry, and the midstream oil and gas industry. They're very distinct operations, and to understand that segregation of our businesses is very, very valuable, because very few companies can cross over into all three sectors.
Yep. And
Upstream, downstream, and midstream. Understand the difference.
Absolutely. And that's one reason why in our podcast agenda here, we're actually doing summaries of each of those segments. So earlier today I did a summary on the upstream piece, and then after lunch we will do a segment on midstream, and we will also do a segment on downstream. So we really want to help provide you with at least some of the basics in terms of understanding our industry, so that you can take that and not rest there, but use that to springboard off to really build your understanding and your knowledge of the industry. The other thing I will put out there is, as well as opportunities with all of the diversity councils and industry associations, social media is becoming a stronger and stronger way to connect with people. I don't know how many Shell people are on LinkedIn, but it's a whole bunch of them. And there are lots of ways to find people who are in different pieces of any company, to get connected with them, to start building a network based on mutual sharing. So not just looking to get something from that person, but bringing value and having mutual sharing.
That's very good, yeah.
And I know, Deborah, one thing I don't think I've heard mentioned during this podcast is the value of partnering.
Yes.
I'll let you expand on that, but it's an approved method to help you grow the footprint and breadth of your company.
Yes.
Is by partnering with like industries, even your competitors in some cases, to be able to get your foot in the door is our partnering opportunities.
Yep, absolutely. And so we actually talked for a bit this morning about the range of partnering opportunities. And so once again, we would really encourage you to think about that as you're doing your industry research and getting really honed in on what you do best. Then also starting to think more broadly about what capabilities could you work to put together to give you a chance to be more competitive and more applicable in our industry.
Suzanne and I were talking this morning at breakfast about a really good success story that we've had in Shell with SNS Tool, and what SNS Tool has done. And it's, I think when I reflect on it, when Suzanne and I were talking about it, it's really truly impressive. They started out small at Martinez at our Martinez facility, doing safety equipment and MRO equipment.
Maintenance, repairs, and operations.
Yes, maintenance, repair, and operation. And then they went from our Martinez facility to also supply our Puget Sound facility. And it took a while. It took a couple of years for them to grow their credibility across the U.S. footprint. But eventually they made it across the entire U.S. And so now they're supplying safety and MRO equipment across all of our manufacturing sites in the U.S. It took perseverance, it took resilience, and I think the most important thing that Suzanne and I were talking about was that Tracy,
Tracy Tompkins, the
CEO and the owner, Tracy really built a credible plan. She built a credible plan for how she was going to expand out from Martinez and Puget Sound and take on the entire Gulf Coast, right? What did that plan look like? What were the concrete actions? She was able to articulate that back to Shell as to how she would be able to take that over. She was able to actually make the commitment that because this is such a big step forward, she was going to kind of pause all other business development activities so that she could focus and get this right. And that meant a lot. And she's done a phenomenal job at really growing her company. And it's not that you're going to pause your business development forever. You're going to take a pause for a short period of time so you can focus all your energies on getting this right, really solidifying your growth, and then moving on. And I think what Tracy did, you probably know more about this than I do, she partnered with other distributors to be able to expand
because she
in the
had to
Gulf Coast.
have her physical distribution in the Gulf Coast as well, and she was astute enough to understand how to network and build that distribution network and partner with warehouses and companies in the Gulf Coast that had close proximity to our refineries and chemical plants that sit on the Gulf Coast. So
that's a great example.
You know, we didn't tell her how to do that. She told us how she was going to do it when she came in and did the pre-bid presentations.
I think that's a tremendous success story and growth. I mean, she went from a very small company to taking other steps and then taking a big step, but really planning out and thinking how to take those big steps.
That's
right?
a really great example.
It's tremendous, yeah.
So, for our last few minutes, I'd really like to ask Suzanne to focus in on some of the kinds of companies that we're on the lookout for here, and some of the kinds of opportunities and supplies and services that we are on the lookout for.
So some of the big ones, I'll tell you some areas where I see challenges when I've been in this role are around industrial roofing. Process pipe fabrication.
Yeah.
Some of our Gulf Coast facilities are wanting to add more MWBEs in the process pipe arena. One of the areas, especially in upstream, where I see a huge gap are for diving services and also for helicopter transport from our land out to our offshore rigs. That's a very, very specialized industry, and there are very few majority players. We would love to see some minority and women-owned businesses in that arena. Some of the other things that we're looking for is civil construction. Construction tends to be very regionalized amongst your smaller companies, but we're having a hard time, especially in the Pennsylvania area, finding civil construction companies that have the breadth to work there. There are civil construction companies all over the U.S., but we're having problems in certain areas finding civil construction. Let's see, some rail car maintenance. That was a new one that was brought to me recently.
That's a big opportunity, and
rail car fleet management.
Yeah, rail fleet services. Being able to monitor the cars, being able to not only monitor where the cars are, but monitor when they need to go in for maintenance. How long is it taking in the maintenance shops? How quickly are we turning it around? What's coming up? How are we starting to schedule that type of activity? There aren't any women-owned or minority-owned suppliers in that space, and so it's an opportunity.
There are a few, but they're very, very small and they're not even regional. They're local. And so when you're dealing with a company as big as Shell, I mean, you got to think in this space, you got to have a footprint across the entire U.S. Right. And if you don't have the footprint, figure out how to work those JV relationships where you can cover the entire U.S. or at least a region instead of a local hotspot.
Right.
Yep, absolutely. So any of the others we want to touch on here?
Let's see. Offshore maintenance, painting and blasting on our offshore rigs.
Yep.
That one's pretty involved, pretty complicated, and the companies that we have are doing a great job. But we would just like to see some competition in that area.
Yep. I think that's one of the values that when we talk about why we do supplier diversity. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons, about it being, it's the right thing to do, and it brings innovation and so forth and so on. But one of the things that we look forward to do is bring, frankly, increased competition. and to give us some more options in our supply chain so that we can be sure we're getting the best value. And when a space becomes dominated by just 2 or 3 large players, then sometimes it just doesn't feel very good to us. Sometimes we really want to have more choice, and it's in some of those areas where it would be great to see WBEs and MBEs, for that matter, start to do some focus.
I would agree. I mean, a lot of situations. I mean, we're clamoring for more competition, and so the
Yes.
more competition we can actually have, the better off it is for the entire supply chain in the industry.
Absolutely.
And
So, yeah,
another thing we were
absolutely.
talking about this morning is the fact that your large or your very large mega conglomerates that we deal with, a lot of those are merging now.
Yes.
So
Become
it's
even bigger.
decreasing the competition even more for us.
Yep, absolutely. So for WBEs out there, you know, for some of those large mega conglomerates and that provide huge pieces of our business, we know that there's not going to be a WBE next year that's going to step in and say, I'm prepared to take huge pieces of those businesses. But if there's no company that is starting in some of these spaces, then if there's no start now, then there's nothing in 5 years. And if there's nothing in 5 years, there's nothing in 10 years or 20 years. So these are real opportunities that for WBEs and MBEs who have a long-term view, who are willing to address some of these hard spaces where we'd like to see increased competition, and willing to do the hard work and take some of the risk to move into some of these spaces, there might be some long-term opportunities. So keep that in mind.
And to keep it in simple terms, you know me, I'm a straight shooter. My thing, think big and act bigger.
There you go.
True, yeah.
Think big and act big. So we've just about reached our time for this morning. We will be starting back up at, I believe it's 2 o'clock this afternoon. No, 2:45, I see. And we will have a very special guest at 2:45, Pamela Prince Eason, who is the CEO and president of WeBank, will join us for a bit. We are in booth 1615, so if anyone is listening who is actually here and wants to come by and see us, we did not talk about everything that's on our future opportunities list, so there are some other things there, and if you want to know more, please come on by our booth. We would really like to see you and talk with you and help you understand how you can find your fit. So thank you for joining us, and we're going on break until 2:45. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.